Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little different, a really surgical deep dive into just one piece of music.
Just one track.
One track that is being hailed as really the defining statement of one of the most radical transformations we've seen in music for a long time. We are talking about Uicideboy's Leviticus.
Yeah, and it's so much more than a simple track. It's a sonic declaration. You could even argue it's a spiritual manifesto.
And it was released on December 25th, 2025. Track 1 on the album THY Will Be Done.
And it really is the monument to the duo's sobriety. It documents this profound, this psychological and spiritual transformation. The sources actually use the Greek term for it, metanoia.
And metanoia, that word is so crucial here. It means a radical change of mind and spirit.
Exactly.
Because for the better part of a decade, the Grey 5-9 collective was synonymous with this cult of suicide aesthetic. Nihilism, self-destruction.
Right, the raw documentation of it.
And the analysis we have points out this song is a 180-degree turn. It's trading that self-destruction for what they're calling a new crusade, a kind of spiritual militancy.
And the reason this works for a deep dive is that the shift is so complex. It's not simplistic. We're not just looking at lyrics. The analysis pulled together by critics, by cultural psychologists, it shows this is a transdisciplinary document.
How so?
It's linking the duo's bars to theology, to clinical psychology, even sociological theory. It's basically a treaty on human transformation, all delivered in 3 minutes of aggressive trap music.
Okay, let's unpack this transformation. I think we have to start where the listener first encounters it, which is the sound itself.
Yeah.
Because before you even process a single word, the beat creates this profound, almost unsettling cognitive dissonance.
That dissonance is completely intentional, and it's all in the technical architecture. The producer, Lick or Scrim, he chose a tonal center that is just completely anomalous for their discography.
Which is?
The track is built on the key of C major.
C major, that is. That's the simplest, most fundamental scale in Western music. You associate it with purity, with heroism, a happy ending.
Right. It's the absolute last thing you'd expect from the signature murky, dark funk that they pioneered.
Exactly. If you wanted a dark anthem, you'd be in a minor key.
Absolutely. So by using C major, they're asserting a theme of purity, but then it's mixed with these saturated, distorted 808s and that gritty New Orleans production style.
So you get the purity, but it's covered in dirt.
The light is shining through the grime, but the grime is still there. Very much so.
And that contrast is just amplified by the pacing. The tempo is locked in at 140 BPM.
That speed isn't just fast, it's a physiological statement. 140 BPM is known to induce a state of sympathetic alert.
The fight-or-flight response.
The classic fight or flight.
Okay.
You are listening to a war march, not a chill track. And the sources frame this speed, combined with that clean key, as establishing what they call the soteriology of the war.
Soteriology of the war. Okay, let me see if I'm following this. The key insight here is that the anger, the aggression, all that high-intensity emotion that defined their addiction period, it isn't gone.
Not at all.
It's just been retasked.
Exactly. The old mindset was destructive nihilism. The new philosophy is that internal peace or sobriety, it's not something you passively stumble upon.
Right.
It has to be violently, aggressively conquered. They're weaponizing the anger that used to drive them into substance abuse, and they're directing it toward a new struggle for virtue. It's an interesting concept, suggesting the capital virtue here is holy wrath.
Wow. That sets an incredibly intense stage, and before the flow even begins, we get that opening sequence, which brings in the Old Testament immediately.
And this is where it gets really interesting. You hear this highly authoritative voice speaking what is a direct sample and adaptation of the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 30.
It sounds like the voice of judgment.
Slow, deliberate, massive. And it establishes a theological locus of control. This is central to the cognitive restructuring you see in recovery. For years, their story was one of random, chaotic, senseless suffering.
Right.
Now, the narrator is accepting the suffering of the past decade, the addiction, the overdoses, not as bad luck, but as disciplina pedagogica.
Corrective punishment.
Or a pedagogical discipline. The pain wasn't random. It was a brutal teacher.
It was necessary.
Precisely. And that shift from seeing pain as just random victimization to seeing it as necessary discipline, that's one of the most fundamental cognitive restructurings you find in addiction recovery. It mirrors moving through, step 2 or 3 of a 12-step program.
And the specific language here is so vital. The crucial line they invoke is the lex talionis, the law of the talion.
Therefore, all who have devoured you shall be devoured.
The classic eye for an eye.
But it's applied metaphorically to the vice itself. We need to translate this for you listening. Who are the devourers?
Well, they're the substances. Fentanyl, heroin, benzos, the literal things that consume their lives.
And maybe the exploitative systems, the critics, the industry pressure that fed the addiction. By invoking lex talionis, the artist is turning that predatory dynamic back on the substance.
So the addict stops being the victim of the drug.
And actively becomes its executioner. It's an act of vengeance against the vice.
But then this really solemn biblical sentencing is interrupted by what might be the most jarring moment in the whole track. As the prophetic reading ends, you get their chaotic, street-level producer tag, lick, you did good, lick, followed by, it's a smash.
It's brilliant. It's the breaking of the fourth wall. It anchors the sacred right back into the reality of their sound.
It validates the whole thing.
It validates the dark, aggressive production, that 140 BPM war march, as an acceptable spiritual offering. The old identity is blessing the new mission. It's saying, this aggression is allowed. It's necessary.
That's a phenomenal setup. So if Scrim's production sets the militant context, Ruby the Cherry's verse gives us that vulnerable internal plea.
Right.
His first line is immediate. Praise the mighty God, take me out of this facade.
And that plea to be taken from the facade that is so deeply rooted in clinical psychology. He's talking about imposter syndrome, disassociation.
All his alter egos.
Exactly. Ruby famously used so many odd enough to snow leopard, plague. Here, he's admitting those names, those personalities, they were just masks, a desperate way to hide the real unmanaged pain.
I mean, he used to rap, I am the Lord of Loneliness, in a track like Antarctica.
The classic.
And now the Lord of Loneliness is pleading with the mighty God for rescue. That's not just a pivot. That is the death of the entire narcissistic rap ego that fueled their early stuff.
And that humility immediately reveals the scale of the internal fight. He shifts from fighting off demons one by one to admitting, now there's legions of them coming for me.
Which is a direct biblical echo of Mark 5.9, where the possessed man says, my name is Legion, for we are many.
And the clinical translation of that is devastating. The sources note that when a long-term addict stops consuming, the brain often starts to unfreeze complex, repressed traumas all at once.
So the internal battle becomes this full-scale war of the soul.
A psychomachia, yeah. Against an enemy that is suddenly too numerous to fight alone. It's that visceral feeling of just being overwhelmed by your own mind.
And his solution to this overwhelming force is the line that, as you mentioned, probably alienated a lot of their old-school nihilist fans.
Oh, for sure.
Because I got washed clean in Christ's blood.
It marks the definitive end of the kill-yourself era. Think about the old G59 iconography. Blood was about self-harm, violence, death.
Right.
Here, the blood is sacrificial. It's theological. The universal solvent that purifies guilt. It's the ultimate neurotheological substitution.
So he's describing the spiritual experience as a kind of sustainable neurochemical survival mechanism.
Exactly, which culminates in his request for a complete destruction. Lord, send a mighty flood. I'll be welcome in the righteous dove.
And for a duo from New Orleans, a city defined by the trauma of Katrina, asking for a mighty flood that is not a trivial request.
No, he's asking for a catastrophe.
A blank slate, a tabula rasa. He's willing to destroy everything to rebuild from zero.
It signifies this total willingness to submit to chaos if it leads to cleansing. And the reward, the righteous dove that symbolizes the Holy Spirit, or, clinically, the eventual reward of emotional stability.
So Ruby's verse is anxious, it's intense, he's focused on receiving divine help.
That's right, which sets up a fantastic contrast for Scrim.
Right. We transition to his verse, and it's a totally different approach. Where Ruby is the anxious prophet, Scrim is what the sources call the ascetica del guerrero, the warrior ascetic.
The calm, disciplined soldier.
And his bridge uses that invocation that perfectly fuses the sacred and the street. As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no man, I shall fear no evil.
It's Psalm 23.4, of course, but it's injected with the code of the street. It's a line that Coolio gave street jurisdiction to in Gangsta's Paradise. But Scrim's defiance here isn't just bravery, it's rooted in familiarity. He has walked through that valley-deep addiction, overdoses, so many times that he's no longer a tourist, he's a resident.
The absence of fear is just comfort with the darkness.
He owns the valley. And this familiarity leads to his operating philosophy. Pray for peace, prepare for war.
Which is the essence of his warrior asceticism. Peace isn't passive.
No, it's a constant active war against your own neurochemical impulses, against temptation. For Scrim, sobriety is a state of constant preparation, a daily battle.
He embodies this resilience that's earned through discipline, not waiting for rescue.
And then we get the single line that really captures the core theme of the entire album.
Jesus wept, for God I stepped, but first the old me had to die.
Jesus wept. From John 11:35, it's the shortest verse in the Bible. It's the most human. It validates pain. But the clinical insight here, the crucial part for recovery, is the death of the ego.
The addict personality.
Right. Scrim acknowledges that the addict personality scarecrow literally had to be deliberately killed for Scrim, the person, to live. That death of the ego is just fundamental to any lasting transformation in a 12-step program.
But wait, this is where it gets tricky, because he then channels that old aggressive energy with this incredible oxymoron. Shedding out my flesh, smoking demons got me high. How does killing demons get him high if he's trying to escape that chemical rush?
That's the peak of the concept of sublimation. He is inverting the entire addiction dynamic. Before, he was chasing an external chemical high.
Right.
Now, the spiritual victory, the act of defeating or smoking his demons, produces an endogenous dopamine high. The spiritual warfare is the rush.
Wow. So the pursuit of virtue has successfully replaced the chemical dependency.
That's it. He replaced the chemical reward system with a spiritual one based on discipline and conquest.
That's profound.
And he wraps up his mission statement by completely redefining their whole collective. Gray 5-9, the new crusade, my destination where the darkness waits.
So G59 isn't a nihilistic label anymore. It's a militant spiritual movement. But why return to the darkness? Why not move toward the light after you get sober?
This is where the sources label him the dark bodhisattva.
Okay, what is that?
A bodhisattva, in Buddhist philosophy, is someone who achieves enlightenment, but then chooses to remain in the world, specifically in the darkness, to help other people find their way out.
So he's not just seeking the light for himself and staying there.
No. He chooses to go back to the darkest places, the streets, the toxic corners, the fans who are still lost to nihilism, and guide them. Not as a fellow victim anymore, but as a conqueror who knows the terrain.
Teaching resilience by example, that reframes the whole mission of the album.
It does.
So, okay, let's synthesize this. When we put the musicology, the theology, and the clinical insights together, what does it all mean?
Well, the unifying thesis is really elegant. They're taking 2,500-year-old terminology, biblical warfare, the law of the talion, demons, legions, and using it to validate feelings of alienation and recovery in our modern secular world.
And the sources argue that that kind of religious terminology, it provides a vocabulary for trauma that secular psychology sometimes just can't equal in its emotional intensity.
Exactly. That translation is key for you, the listener. If you felt that crushing weight, it is so much more powerful to be able to say, I'm fighting legions, than it is to say, I'm struggling with intrusive thoughts.
The scale feels right.
It gives the suffering dignity, and it gives the fight a holy purpose. Ultimately, the song is positing that peace is not the absence of war, but the constant preparation for it.
The paradox of freedom is achieved through submission.
Submission to a higher discipline, whether you call that structured faith or just the rigid, non-negotiable routine of sobriety.
So we've seen this journey all captured in one track, from the Lord of Loneliness that defined their early career
to the warrior ascetic leading a spiritual crusade. Leviticus is the undeniable, aggressive documentation of a genuine transformation, a remarkable fusion of Memphis funk, biblical prophecy, and clinical insight.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with, building on this idea of the necessary death of the past identity. If the old me must die for the new self to survive, is Leviticus ultimately a funereal dirge marking the burial of the nihilist self, or is it an explosive revolutionary hymn of birth, a new beginning that sounds an awful lot like the end of the world?
Consider the cost of that freedom. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.